Merry Christmas. It's Happy New Year's now, idiot. Okay, can you stop talking for like 20 minutes? Whatever. Happy New Year's. I got back from break less than 24 hours ago, and I'm not feeling great. Have you ever felt like no matter what you've accomplished in a month, it doesn't feel like it's enough? I've been struggling with that for a while, and the only way I can think to solve it is to do some introspection. But even then, I haven't found the solution I've been looking for. If you would like to get into the friendly fire section early, I'm gonna throw the timestamp for you right now. But for those of you who are still here, let's get started with the video. This series, for those of you who don't know, is about the Arcane Trials. It's a roguelike I'm currently working on, and it fixes the problem with all fantasy games. It forces you to play with friends, or at least tolerate people you don't like or even don't know in order to defeat skilled bosses. To go a little bit more in depth, upon loading into the game, you design your character and choose a house to belong to. There are currently 3 houses in the game: the Oseus house, which is similar to a thief class, the Malifree house, which is similar to a tank class, and the Valix house, which I honestly cannot compare to anything else, but more on those houses later. After you design your character, you are sent into the lobby. From there, you form a party or go into the dungeons yourself. But if you die, there is no returning, like any roguelike. I should also mention, as any roguelike, the bosses are incredibly hard, and there's very little chance that you will actually be able to beat them alone. But for some of you, that might be a challenge worth accepting. If it turns out that you want to accept that challenge, then I have some encouraging words for you. This is a quote that has motivated me every single day of this month. Work is the greatest thing in the world, so we should always save some of it for tomorrow. As I said, I devoted myself to this quote this last month, and you might be asking, well, how did you get any work done? And I didn't, but that's irrelevant. It wasn't the quote's fault, I swear. In all seriousness, I started this month like all the others. I counted down the days until I had a school break. I soon realized that Christmas wasn't coming nearly as quick as I originally thought, so I decided to work on the game in order to make the time pass. And boy did it. As I mentioned earlier, it feels like I haven't done enough this month, but maybe that's because I feel like I'm moving backwards. In my last video, I focused on creating a game lobby, and I wasn't satisfied with how it looked. So I did the only logical thing. I completely deleted it and spent the last month redesigning it. So maybe I don't feel like I've accomplished anything this month because I felt like everything I've done was already completed. I don't really know, but what I do know is that the only reason this map looks remotely good is because I kept asking my sister for help. After she stopped rolling her eyes at me, she told me that I needed to add layers into the mountains, add rock to the ground, add some sand along the river, otherwise it would look strange. And after hearing her heartbreaking notes, it took me about a day to get a map design I liked, but I'm sure I'll make changes in the future. After finishing the layout and terrain of the map, I made models to put inside of it. And if you haven't noticed already, I recreated my bridge and Torii gates. I really love this red design because it brings vibrancy to the map that wasn't there before. I also redesigned my gazebo, or what I think is a gazebo. I'm not really sure at this point. And speaking of redesigning buildings, some of you might have noticed that I haven't added in the buildings from the previous video. That's because I spent so much time on the other builds that I forgot about them until writing this video. So maybe next video they'll be in the game, but they'll definitely have some revamping. While I was redesigning the lobby, I also started to create a way for players to customize their characters. I'm still working on actually creating those cosmetics, for example, shirts, pants, shoes, faces, but I don't know how to make any of those, so that will be a not so fun adventure to embark upon. And if any of you have any tips for this, let me know in the comments because your boy is desperate. The customization menu is a simple system, but it felt far from that when I was actually programming it. In its entirety, The player clicks an arrow, it cycles through a list, and equips the cosmetic item onto the player. Simple, right? Except not so much, because I struggled with loading the items onto the player for almost 2 hours, and it turned out to be an easy fix, which, if you have not experienced, is the most annoying thing in the world. I don't even completely understand what I changed to fix it, but from what I've gathered, when you equip the new cosmetic item, you need to equip it with this other piece of text, instead of only having the numbers, which is what I did. But when you use only the numbers, it already automatically adds on the text, so it's kind of stupid, and I don't understand any of it. And that's the perfect transition for what we're going to be talking about for next. The programming problems and solutions. I'm currently programming the combat for the players, and essentially when the player clicks a button, for example mouse button 1, the client will fire something called a remote event, which connects the client to the server. Now, there are 2 main reasons you want to connect the client to the server. 1, when you create a cooldown on the server for when players are allowed to attack or dash, it prevents hackers from bypassing this cooldown, because if it was on the client, hackers are able to manipulate it, but you can't manipulate elements on the server. The second reason for using the server instead of the client is if information isn't passed through the server, other players won't see it. So, take for example, you have a particle effect of rocks being sent out flying when you attack, and you program that on the client side. Then the player you are attacking won't see those rocks, because it's not on the server. That isn't much of a problem, but I think it's just lame if the person you're attacking doesn't see these particles flying. Besides that, the combat system was pretty straightforward, and that's because I've spent a lot of time creating them in the past. My problems lied with the AI. I was working on the AI detecting whether the player is blocking or not, and I'm using something called an attribute, which is very similar to a property for an object. And if you don't know what a property is, it's essentially transparency or the color of an object, stuff like that. Anyways, with an attribute, you can make it to be whatever you want it to be. But the AI was not detecting the player's actions correctly, or it wasn't detecting its attribute. And the reason for that was because I had the name of the attribute incorrect. I was very annoyed, to say the least, when I found that out, and I may have or may not have quit programming for the day after that. However, even though I quit programming, and I despise it, I always find myself coming back to it. Maybe it's because I hope that the work in the end is worth it, but I guess you can be the judge of that. I showcased my animations in the last video, but I hadn't actually incorporated them into the game yet. Well, that changed this month, and I found out that these animations aren't good at all. Of course they suck, you made them. Shut up, bro, that's what I said. Anyways, as I was saying, the animations aren't very good, but I'm having a blast streaming up about how I want the combat to feel. I'm currently going for a Final Fantasy style of combat, but I really wouldn't know if it is or isn't because I haven't played Final Fantasy before. And at this point you might be thinking, well then, how do you know if you want your combat to feel like Final Fantasy? And to that I say touche, and I have no response except for topic change time. We can all agree that friendly fire is dope. It makes the game more challenging, and come on, these clips are hilarious.
There was a misinput, calm down! You calm the down!
So why don't more games utilize it? Well, there's one important thing to remember when considering adding friendly fire into your game. Does it fit the rest of your game? A great example is CSGO. It's a slower paced, more strategic shooter. You need to be aware of your surroundings. Is your teammate in your crosshair? Is your teammate in the room where you're about to throw a grenade? Do you do it anyways because it would be funny? Of course you do. Who are you kidding? That makes the game fun. Friendly fire becomes a challenging and extremely hilarious mechanic. Now, an example of a game you don't want to have friendly fire in is BattleBit. There are almost 300 players and something is always happening. People throw grenades constantly. Can you imagine if that game had friendly fire? It would be so chaotic and it would get toxic quick. However, a game genre I think is missing out on the joy and the challenge of friendly fire. Can you guess? Roguelikes. Friendly fire would make the games more challenging. Not that they aren't hard already, but I think it will be a great addition. I've seen games that are similar to mine essentially become hack and slashes when the boss gets stunned, and I think that's ridiculous. Take Elden Ring, for example. When you're fighting a boss, all you are doing is essentially waiting for it to do an attack, get stunned, and then you attack it within that time frame. You can't tell me that that's not the lamest thing ever. What about a more realistic boss that might still do a move that stuns it, but it doesn't do the exact same thing every time, keeping you on your toes? It doesn't have a pattern because it's adjusting in real time. That's what I want my game to accomplish. Now, you might be thinking that the boss would then be impossible to beat. Well, that's kind of the point. With friends, that challenge is a little less, but it's still present. You put everything on the line with every fight, and it's not an easy one where you study the boss for 5 minutes and kill it because you figured out its patterns. You strategize and try to kill it before it kills you. Now, I might get flamed in the comments, but I think that's why the premise of SAO is so cool. They might have information on the boss, but once they get in the fight, it's up to chance. In the first boss fight, it switches its sword style and everyone panics. Well, everyone except for this guy. Now, I know that was a little bit of a tangent and it wasn't exactly about friendly fire, but what I was trying to get at is if a boss gets stunned and every player can run up to it and attack without any care in the world, that's lame. Now, a great example of friendly fire in my game is the Velix's Righteous Miasma ability. Now, none of you know about it yet, but this is a fog that covers a radius and damages unrighteous enemies. Now, this might not seem significant, but when you take into account that the Oseises are classified as unrighteous, it becomes a bigger deal. Players can't run up to the boss and attack all at once. They have to be aware if their teammates are nearby. This also means that mages can't just toss their abilities around. It sucks that I had to spoil the Velix's ability early, but I hope that you understand what I want this game to be, and I hope it gets you excited like it does for me. Finally, we can get to my favorite part of every video, brainstorming. I'm also going to focus on discussing the houses like in my previous video. And in my previous video, I said that the Oseis class, or house, is my favorite. But I lied. It's the Velix house. Now, I've conceptualized a couple of abilities for the Velix house this past month, and let me tell you, they are downright awesome. But before we get into those, I should tell you about the Velix house. They are righteous, noble, brave, and strong. Originally, I was going to have this class become more like knights and more of a medium type build, but I realized that that was too generic and I would never want to play them, so I switched it up. They still have similar characteristics to knights, you know, being righteous and all, but they use wind magic. This means their movement is insane, because instead of relying on running, they levitate above the ground. Hopefully that piques your interest and we can actually move on to the abilities. When they dash, they'll leave behind a mirage, or a clone. Obviously this will have a cooldown, but this is their passive ability. Their first actual ability is called Tempest Winds. This surrounds the player and it will slash at enemies. And also, in light of friendly fire being added, it will also damage allies. Now, this is very important. I didn't copy this from Boruto, if any of you were thinking about that. I thought about this all on my lonesome. The next ability that I kinda spoiled is Righteous Miasma. This will increase the player's movement and attack speed, and it will also damage enemies that are unrighteous while they are in the mist. Now, I might change that to weakening instead, because depending on how you set up that damage system, it might be OP. And speaking of OP, let's talk about the Oseises. the Osei's house is a disgrace to society. They're criminals, and they wear these cool things called shame masks, which in medieval times was used as a form of punishment, which, in my opinion, is sick. Their first ability is called Chains of Dread. You place chains down similar to a bear trap, and if the enemy activates it, they will be stunned for about 3 seconds. The next ability is called Warped Blade. You throw a dagger and you can teleport it. And finally, their passive ability has no name, but it allows them to run on walls. And because I have no transition planned, let's end with the Malifree house. The Malifree house is, like I said earlier, the tank class. It's their job to protect their allies and grab the attention of the boss. And they can't do that without an ability. So, their first ability has no name, but it aggroes the boss, like a taunt. Finally, their next ability is called Earth Splinter. Now, the player's sword is kind of dug into the ground and flings up and flings a piece of rock at the target. Unfortunately, I haven't thought out how I want the Malifree to work. I thought about Earth Magic, and maybe I'll give them more of, instead of flinging it at the target, maybe it's a rock wall to protect the mages, for example, because that's really their job, is to protect the mages. But they are going to be very important later. They've been severely neglected this past month, however, so they will definitely get a redesign in the future, just like the Valixes. I have nothing else, so if you stayed until the end of the video, I thank you. But I also have something cool to show you, to reward you for staying. If you tap out of the video right now and look at the like button, I can make it glow up. Check this out. Make sure to smash the like button. Pretty funny, right? Alright, this video is probably way too long, but who cares? Thank you for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed. I enjoyed making this video. So, check back with me next month. Bye.